Iron Triangle under heavy fire. The communists move up to pour their...
Did you know that there was a conflict that changed the course of the world but is often forgotten? While other conflicts like the Vietnam War have garnered more attention, the Korean War quietly shaped the history of the 20th century. It was the first major armed confrontation between communist forces and the Western world after World War II, setting the stage for intense Cold War tensions and solidifying the division of the Korean Peninsula, a boundary that still resonates to this day. Are you curious about the origins, events, and outcomes of this war, as well as the powerful impact and lasting legacy it left behind? If so, be sure not to miss today's video. At the close of World War II in 1945, Korea found itself liberated from 35 years of Japanese colonial rule. However, this newfound freedom was immediately complicated by the geopolitical interests of the United States and the Soviet Union, the two emerging superpowers. Korea was arbitrarily divided along the 38th parallel, with the Soviet Union occupying the north and the United States taking control of the south. This division was intended as a temporary measure, but it soon became a fixed boundary due to escalating Cold War tensions. Initially, the US-Soviet Union Commission was established to oversee Korea's transition to independence within 5 years. However, ideological differences and mutual distrust between the occupying powers rendered the commission ineffective. Riots and civil unrest erupted in the South, prompting the United States to declare martial law. The breakdown of cooperative efforts led to the deepening division of Korea, setting the stage for the establishment of two separate governments. In 1948, both the North and the South held separate elections, each solidifying the power of their respective ideological allies. The North became the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, also referred to as DPRK, under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, a communist backed by the Soviet Union. The South declared itself the Republic of Korea, ROK, led by Sunmin Rhee, who was supported by the United States. Both leaders harbored ambitions to reunify Korea under their own regimes, and both sought support from their powerful allies to achieve this goal. By the late 1940s, both Koreas were preparing for potential conflict. The withdrawal of Soviet and American troops did little to ease tensions, as both superpowers left behind military aid and advisors. The North Korean People's Army, also referred to as KPA, was significantly bolstered by Soviet equipment and training, boasting between 150,000 and 200,000 troops by mid-1950. This included experienced veterans from the Chinese Civil War, organized into 10 infantry divisions, 1 tank division, and an Air Force division equipped with fighter planes and bombers. In contrast, the South Korean Army was less prepared. The Republic of Korea Army, ROKA, had approximately 98,000 soldiers, with no tanks and a minimal air force consisting of 22 aircraft. Guerrilla warfare and border skirmishes further de-established the region. Communist sympathizers in the South conducted guerrilla operations, resulting in the deaths of up to 8,000 security personnel and hindering the development of the ROKA. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel, initiating a full-scale invasion of the South. The attack was well coordinated, utilizing tanks and heavy artillery that the South lacked. The KPA advanced rapidly, overwhelming the scattered and under-equipped ROKA units. Within days, the North Koreans captured Seoul, the South Korean capital, forcing the government and military to retreat further south. In the wake of the invasion, South Korean forces under President Sunmin Rhee engaged in brutal reprisals against suspected communist sympathizers. Massacres occurred throughout the summer of 1950, with estimates of up to 200,000 lives lost. These actions highlighted the internal strife within South Korea and the desperation of its leadership in the face of the northern onslaught. The invasion caught the international community by surprise. The United Nations Security Council, notably without the presence of the Soviet Union, due to boycott, swiftly condemned North Korea's actions and authorized the use of force to repel the invasion. The United States, fearing the spread of communism and the potential threat to Japan, decided to intervene militarily. Initially, the US was hesitant to commit large-scale forces, recalling the reluctance to intervene in the Chinese Civil War. However, the fall of China to communism and the swift North Korean advance prompted a reassessment. President Harry S. Truman secured congressional approval for $12 billion in military spending for Korea. Early US involvement consisted of small units transferred from Japan, intended to delay the North Korean advance until larger forces could be mobilized.
Dominating the city as long as they could, and fought in the pit of the 24th Division as long as the division itself shall live.
The first American ground engagement occurred at the Battle of Pusan on July 5, 1950. Task Force Smith, a 540-man unit from the 24th Infantry Division, faced elements of the North Korean 4th Infantry Division and 105th Armored Division. Lacking adequate anti-tank weapons, the Americans were ill prepared to face North Korean T-34 tanks. The engagement resulted in heavy US casualties and demonstrated the need for better equipped and more substantial forces. Subsequent battles saw similar outcomes. The 24th Infantry Division faced continuous defeats as it attempted to delay the North Korean advance. The battles of Pyeongtaek, Cheonan, and Daejeon resulted in significant American losses and the eventual retreat to the southern port city of Pusan. By August 1950, UN forces were confined to a small area in the southeast of Korean Peninsula, known as the Pusan Perimeter. This defensive line was vital as the port of Pusan allowed for the continuous flow of troops, equipment, and supplies. The North Koreans aimed to break through this perimeter and achieve complete victory. The Battle of Pusan Perimeter lasted from August 4 to mid-September 1950. UN forces, now reinforced with America, South Korean, and British troops numbered around 140,000. The defenders utilized natural barriers like the Naktung River and benefited from total air and naval superiority. Despite being outnumbered and facing logistical challenges, the North Korean forces launched multiple offensives along the perimeter. One of the significant engagements was the Naktung Bulge, where fierce fighting occurred as North Korean troops attempted to cross the river. UN forces, including the US 24th and 25th Infantry Divisions, repelled numerous attacks, inflicting heavy casualties on the enemy. The North Korean supply lines were overextended, and their troops were increasingly exhausted and depleted. General Douglas MacArthur, the UN commander, devised a bold plan to relieve pressure on the Pusan perimeter. Operation Chromite, the amphibious landing at Incheon, aimed to cut off North Korean supply lines and recapture Seoul. Incheon was a risky choice due to its difficult tidal conditions and narrow channels, but MacArthur believed that its unexpectedness would catch the North Koreans off guard. On September 15, 1950, UN forces executed the landing successfully. The initial assault involved US Marines, who quickly secured the beaches and overcame light resistance. The capture of Wolmi-do Island and the subsequent seizure of Gimpo Airfield allowed UN forces to establish a strong foothold. The North Korean defenders were unprepared for the assault, and their forces were spread thin due to commitments at the Pusan perimeter. Following the landing, UN forces advanced towards Seoul. Fierce urban combat ensued, but by September 28, the capital was recaptured. Simultaneously, UN forces broke out from the Pusan perimeter. The North Korean army, caught between advancing UN troops from both the south and the west, began a hasty retreat. Significant numbers of North Korean soldiers were captured or killed, and their military capabilities were severely diminished. With the North Korean army in disarray, UN forces pursued them across the 38th parallel. Despite warnings from China about potential intervention, the UN authorized the advance into North Korea on October 7, 1950. The goal was to unify Korea under a democratic government and eliminate the communist regime in the north. UN forces captured Pyongyang, the North Korean capital, on October 19. The rapid advance continued towards the Yalu River, the border with China. However, as UN troops moved further north, logistical challenges increased and supply lines became overstretched. The mountainous terrain and approaching winter also posed significant difficulties. Unbeknownst to the UN command, China had decided to intervene. The Chinese leadership under Mao Zedong viewed the UN advance as a threat to its national security. China, also encouraged by the Soviet Union to enter the conflict with promises of military support. On October 19, 1950, the People's Volunteer Army (PVA) crossed the Yalu River into North Korea. The Chinese forces launched surprise attacks against UN troops in late October, initiating the first phase offensive. The battles of Anjong and Yunsan saw Chinese troops engaging and inflicting heavy casualties on South Korean and American units. The UN forces were caught off guard, as intelligence had underestimated the scale of Chinese involvement. Despite initial setbacks, UN commanders believed that Chinese forces were limited in number and capability. General MacArthur continued to push for an offensive to reach the Yalu River, leading to the home by Christmas offensive in late November. However, the Chinese launched the second phase offensive, deploying approximately 300,000 troops. The Chinese offensives forced UN troops into a rapid retreat. In the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, UN forces, primarily the US X-Corps, were encircled by vastly superior Chinese numbers, fighting in freezing conditions. The UN troops executed a fighting withdrawal to Hungman, where a massive evacuation took place. Over 100,000 troops and 100,000 North Korean civilians were evacuated by sea in what became known as the Christmas Miracle. By January 1951, Chinese and North Korean forces had recaptured Seoul. The UN forces established defensive lines south of the 38th parallel. Morale among UN troops was low, and there were discussions about withdrawing from Korea entirely. However, the appointment of General Matthew Ridgway as commander of the 8th Army revitalized the UN forces. Ridgway recognized the troops, improved morale, and launched limited offensives to regain lost territory. The Chinese, facing their own logistical challenges and heavy casualties, were unable to sustain their momentum. The battles of Chepionni and the Twin Tunnels in February 1951 saw UN forces successfully halt Chinese advances. By mid-1951, the war had settled into a stalemate around the 38th parallel. Both sides conducted limited offensives and artillery duels, but neither could achieve a decisive breakthrough. The rugged terrain and fortified positions made advances costly and difficult. Armistice negotiations began in July 1951, but were protracted and fraught with disagreements. Key issues included the repatriation of prisoners of war and the exact delineation of the boundary between North Korea and South Korea. Fighting continued throughout the negotiations, with notable battles at Bloody Ridge, Heartbreak Ridge, and Pork Chop Hill. In the air, the conflict saw significant aerial combat, with jet fighters engaging in dogfights over Megali. The Soviet Union, while officially not belligerent, provided pilots and aircraft to support North Korea and China. After 2 years of negotiations, an armistice was signed on July 27, 1953, at Panmunjom. The agreement established a Korean Demilitarized Zone (DMZ), a buffer zone roughly along the 38th parallel, and called for a ceasefire. Notably, South Korea's President Syngman Rhee refused to sign the agreement, desiring to continue to fight for a unified Korea. The armistice didn't result in a formal peace treaty, and technically, North and South Korea remain at war to this day. The conflict resulted in massive casualties on all sides. UN forces suffered approximately 200,000 casualties, while North Korean and Chinese casualties were estimated between 550,000 and 750,000. The Korean War had profound implications for international relations and the global balance of power. It marked the first significant armed conflict of the Cold War, setting a precedent for superpower involvement in regional conflicts. The war solidified the division of the Korean Peninsula, leading to the emergence of two distinct nations with vastly different political, economic, and social systems. In the United States, the war influenced military and foreign policy, leading to an increased emphasis on containment of communism and the buildup of military forces. It also highlighted the challenges of limited warfare and the complexities of engaging in conflicts without clear objectives or public support. For China, the war boosted national pride and solidified the Communist Party's control. It also strained relations with the United States and contributed to China's isolation from the Western world for decades. The Korean War's legacy is still evident today. The DMZ remains one of the most fortified borders in the world. Occasional skirmishes and nuclear tensions on the peninsula continue to pose significant challenges to regional and global security. The Korean War was a critical event in the early years of the Cold War, representing the first major armed clash between Communist and Western forces. It transformed the geopolitical landscape of East Asia and set the stage for future conflicts. The war underscored the complexities of international intervention, the dangers of miscalculation, and the profound human costs of war. Understanding the Korean War is essential for comprehending the historical roots of current tensions on the Korean Peninsula and the enduring impact of Cold War dynamics on contemporary international relations. The conflict serves as a stark reminder of the importance of diplomacy, the risks of ideological confrontations, and the need for sustained efforts towards peace and reconciliation.